Welcome back. David Syme, you, when you started this series, you talked about, or you wanted to convey what you've written a lot about in your book.
Yes.
And about God revealing himself in the world today.
Yeah.
Have you got a few more stories that you could share in God revealing himself?
How many weeks have we got? Yes, I think it's important. I think sometimes we events take place and we're so busy and what have you that we forget actually to think. We just kind of throw them in the, oh, that was just luck, or that was just chance, or what have you. But some of the things that have happened to me, I have no way of explaining it. And of course, Carl Jung said he didn't know how to understand synchronicity, this wonderful word, how these things could happen. And so I think sometimes, especially reflecting and looking back, you start to see how God must have had his hand in some way or other to it. So yes, I can share a couple more with you. Going back to our original foundation where we lived in Oromia in central west Ethiopia, you've got a clinic. You've got patients coming every day to the clinic. By the way, patients isn't necessarily just human beings. In my clinic, the first week I was there, someone bought a horse that had run into a barbed wire fence and opened its chest. And so I had to go and sew that up. So I became a vet. And then there was a sheep that had lost half its tail to a hungry hyena overnight and had to fix that and stop the bleeding. So people would bring all sorts of things that they thought that this clinic that stood for modernism and what have you, that we could do anything in that kind of area. And maybe I was not focused enough to say, no, I can't do that. And so I would always give it a go for their mistake. Their life was hard enough and I would give it a go. So,
and that was part of your upbringing, your father's instructions?
Absolutely, yeah. That's the way my father brought it up. He could do so many things. So anyway, you've got patients coming in, but again, you're not really going out to the community. Yes, in the community, we were there, we sorrowed with them when at a funeral, if there was a wedding, we were part of it. Our children would play with other children, etc., etc. So in that sense, we lived the life of the community, not like the community, but of it. There was good crossovers. We enjoyed Ethiopian food. Is fantastic. If you get a chance to eat it, it's really the best food you can find in Africa. I may be biased, but anyway, it's a great place. But anyway, I was intrigued because I tend to be somewhat visionary, that as I looked over the lake that we had in front of our house, and I knew beyond it, and I didn't know how far, that there was the Blue Nile Valley. And the Blue Nile Valley is so huge. They say you could take, other big cuttings like that and put it in and lose it.
Wow.
They're now damming the Blue Nile that will provide electricity to well near the whole of East Africa.
Wow.
Eventually, there's a lot of discussion about that. But anyway, I wanted to go and be able to visualize the Blue Nile. And I had no idea how far it was. So I had a little Ducati 100 Italian,
motorbike.
a little, motorbike, and I'd made a pallion on the back that I could put some extra fuel, and I didn't know how far I was going, and I always took medicine with me and my stethoscope and what have you, and I had went out and drove on mule tracks and across fields and what have you in the direction north, kind of following a compass that would have let me, and there was some mountain trails and what have you. But anyway, finally, 153 kilometers later, I arrived at a village that was overlooking the big valley, and you could just see that sometimes the muddy Blue Nile, it was anything but blue.
Right.
But anyway, great river, one of Africa's great rivers. And when people talk about the Nile, they don't realize there's two. There's the Blue Nile that comes from Lake Tana in the middle of the highlands, and there's the White Nile that starts in Lake Victoria in Uganda.
Right.
So anyway, I arrived, found the chief, as one does. He was a surprise, but he invited me to stay with him in his house with his wife and daughter. And he invited the people to come and receive treatment. So to the degree that I was able, in that simple condition, I was able to offer some, agape love through medicines directly to people who had absolutely no access to any medical coverage. That's all different now, but that's how it was then.
Sure.
And of course we talked, and he, that night we ate together. Males eat first at that time. So he and I met together. And we're in a little quite a big thatched hut with a thatch roof, and there was just a little paraffin lamp.
I see.
That was the only light that we just had up high. So it was very dark indeed, but I knew that the food is good because they have lovely, food that you can eat, and it's a bit spicy, has to be. But anyway, I was used to that. Anyway, so we ate together, and you eat with your hands. There's
the
no
injera
knives
bread,
involved.
yeah.
Injera, yes. You pick up the injera and wrap it around and then put it in your mouth. Anyway, we're talking about things, and he wanted to have a clinic like the clinic he'd heard about there. And he wanted to have a school like the school we were building there. So there's all this discussion about what we may be able to do or not. And then as we're talking, I felt some hands on my feet. And they were undoing my shoelaces, and I didn't react because I've learned not to. The touch is a very important part of African life, and we tend to think touch is sexual, but it isn't within those cultures. The next thing, my shoe and my sock and the other shoe and socks were taken off, and my feet were placed in warm water, and my feet were washed by his wife. And as this is happening, I'm not ticklish, fortunately, but as it was happening, I'm thinking of scripture, and the Last Supper. I'm thinking of all of this, and here it is in reality, is taking place right there, because they were Coptic Christians and they had this strong background with both Christianity and Judaism. So anyway, and then she washed husband's feet the same and went away. So that happened the first night. Second night we stayed there. We'd had more talk about things, and I was going the next morning, and I'd run out of medicines, etc. And so he, same thing, feet washed and what have you, eating the food. And then suddenly he went away from the table, and he came back to the table, and his wife was with him, and there was his 14-year-old daughter there, all dressed up in a beautiful dress, and a very modest dress with a veil. And he said to me, as we have become friends and now we know each other, he said, I want to give you my daughter's hand in marriage. Now, he didn't mean to sleep with that night. There was nothing about that. This was how you make an agreement with something, and that she would become a wife. And because as a wife, I'm then related, and, it would put pressure on me to do something there. But
like a political agreement.
Yes, but I'm standing there and I'm I don't know what to say. And I'm kind of thinking in my mind, I wonder what the brethren would say about this back home. But anyway, God is good, and he gave me the answer. And I said, I took her hands And I said to him, Chief McConan, his name was McConan. I said, Chief McConan, thank you for such an offer that I'm not worthy of. But I must give your daughter back to you because I have taken a vow. And they understood, as Coptics, they knew vows were more important than anything else.
Okay.
And so I said, I cannot accept your generosity, but I hope that you will find when she is old enough to get a good husband for her. And everything was perfectly smooth and what have you. I said, I'll give thought to the other things we've discussed, and I hope you can come and visit us there someday, which he did. But, you know, it was one of those moments and you say, God, I'm kind of in a trap here.
Right.
What happens?
Yeah.
But I was able simply to say something that was I didn't make it up, absolutely true. I have made a vow. And so in that setting, it was off. But anyway, so next morning,
Yes.
leaving, knowing that God had helped me overnight and had made me a blessing, you know, his name had been glorified by my being there and being able to treat all of these patients. I was hardly out of town and bop went my back tire.
Okay.
And it was a tube. It wasn't tubeless, it was a back tire. And it had, I had a repair kit, but it had ripped out the plug to blow it up. So my father had told me about being in North Africa in the desert, and if you lose a tire, you fill it with sand. And so we filled it, well, I filled it, took it off on one side, stuffed grass as much as I could. I had a lever to take the tire off, so I put it back over all of this, and I found that if I didn't use low gear, it wouldn't slip on the rim and that I could drive at a reasonable slower pace and get home.
Wow.
So I was part way home.
Which was how far away?
Well, home was 153 kilometers.
just down the road.
But about 20 kilometers then down the road, I had to go on the side of a mountain. There was a very narrow mule track. And when I got there, they have lots of eucalyptus. And in their language of Amharic, it is called Bahar Zaf. Zaf is tree. Bahar means from across the sea.
Wow.
So they've actually at some time, it's full of gums. Australians could feel really at home in Ethiopia. Anyway, this very huge tree had fallen across the road and there were two men there cutting it to create access through. And they had a big saw on a big, you know, two-man saw. Yeah. And so they're sawing this, and I came along and I couldn't get past with I couldn't lift it over.
Sure.
And I didn't want to just lift it over and go through. I said, I'll help you.
Yeah.
So I took one arm, and I'm left-handed. And if you look closely, you'll see a scar there.
Yes.
It jumped.
The saw did.
And the saw, and it cut me in two places there on the hand. It missed I could actually see the tendon. It missed the tendon, split it in two. And so here I am, 130 kilometers from home, and an open wound on my throttle hand on the bike. So what do? You know, do you just camp on a dusty road with an open? No, you don't. You do something about it. Anyway, there was a little boy standing there watching. So I said to him in Amharic, because that was an Amharic speaking area, said to him, Amharic, do you know anyone who has a needle and thread? He said, yes, my father is a tailor who makes clothes. And I said, I gave him some money. And I said, could you go and get a needle and thread? And could you find some alcohol? Didn't really want to ask that, but they instill their own alcohol. So I said, like a little alcohol, that and a razor blade. So anyway, he went off and he soon came running back with the goods. And so between him and me, I sewed it up. No anesthetic, but
just a bit of alcohol over the wound.
Yeah, alcohol over the wound, sewed it up, and he cut with the razor blade the little stitches that I'd put in, and I was then able to tear up a bit of cloth from my shirt and wrap it around tightly, and then off we go.
Wow.
So I made it home by God's grace with a repaired hand, no problems.
And a repaired tube.
And you know, Elizabeth was happy to see me home, and was able to, you know, so when you're about God's business, you're not kept from the unexpected.
Sure.
Things can happen. But even through that, you know, I look at this today and I say, wow, that could have been a lot worse, you know. But I was able to be creative, close it, and then get home, take some antibiotics and what have you, and I was fine, and I never had an infection in it or anything. I've got arthritis in my wrist now, but I don't think it's as a cause of that. So another story, a bit later on in 1990, we were working in West Africa then, in Ivory Coast. So Côte d'Ivoire is the proper name. Anyway, so I was brushing up on my French, etc. there. But the General Conference held what they call a fall council, a special meeting of all the churches from around the world in Nairobi, in the Nairobi Conference Center. And Elizabeth and I were invited as delegates to go to that. And in order to get there, we had to fly with Ethiopian Airways. So on our way back, we took a couple of days, well, say about a week, to revisit Ethiopia after what we'd left there in 1977.
Okay.
So we came back, and it was communist led. There was lots of disruption and what have you as part of the revolution. And I wanted to go out to the foundational place to get a bit more strength, you know, and see how they were doing after all of this time.
The town in which you lived and
the little village, where we started, because that's like home to us. It's our Jerusalem too. And I hadn't been there for 16 years, 17 years. Anyway, there was no way of contacting them. They had no radio or anything. No way. So ADRA said, we'll take you in our vehicle. But in order to go, you must get, as a foreign visitor, you must get a pass, because we have to go through a military checkpoint in order to get out there, and all strangers must have this. So I went along to office one morning, explained who I was, what I wanted to do, and they were very nice, but they said, come back tomorrow. I came back tomorrow, same story. I came back tomorrow, third day, same story. So I knew in my own mind that I wasn't going to get there. But as I was walking out of the building, an officer that I hadn't seen came up to me and he whispered in my ear. And he said, go to the gate and ask. They may let you in. Now, I hadn't seen him before. He didn't have his hand out for a gift or anything like that. I won't touch bribery in Africa. I just don't believe it's wrong. And so here, this is in my mind thinking. But like Abraham and Sarah of old in the Old Testament, I'm kind of thinking, well, is this God speaking to me through this man or what? I may help out. So, you know, I may help God a little bit. So I went home, and that morning they picked me up from ADRA, and we were in a four-wheel drive utility. And so I put on a khaki green shirt, and I put on mirror sunglasses and a khaki hat. And we drove up to the gate. As soon as we arrived, a soldier came running out with an AK-47. And before he could open his mouth, I said in his language, what do you want? And he said, Minim, saluted and opened the gate. and we went through. So now I have a theological problem, because was it God that told me to go through the gate? And yet this man probably thought I was a Russian and military advisor because of my dress and let me through. So I didn't know which either, where this was.
Sure.
And I know this may sound terrible, but my mind works in these ways, trying to say, okay, how much of that is God, or is any, or is God frowning on my trick to get through?
Yeah.
But I knew that we'd have to come back and we might have trouble coming back. But anyway, so we drove and we got within about 15 kilometers of the village. It was end of rainy season. It was shocking mud, and then we got bogged in a river for 2 hours. We dug ourselves out of that. We had to unload the vehicle of stuff, and we got out of it, reload it. So it was about 2 hours we were delayed. Unbeknownst to us, as we drove to my place, the veranda, I call it, on the clinic, there at the veranda, the nurse had gone off to Addis Ababa to get medicines. It was shut. The clinic was shut completely. No one there. So some people had come down from the mountain carrying a lady in difficult labor who couldn't deliver.
Wow.
And they had just arrived. And there was a man there called Otto Beckele. And Beckele means to sprout, to grow in the language. And anyway, he was an elderly man, and he had told them, he said, I'm sorry, we can't do anything for you. You'll have to go down the mountain 10, 12 hours on a stretcher, and then get a bus to the nearest hospital, which was 120 kilometers away. And then as they were leaving through the gates and he was shutting the gates, he heard the sound of a vehicle coming. And it was our diesel coming around the road. So he had no idea anyone was coming. This is 17 years after I'd been there. And he said to the people, stop. He said, go and put it on the veranda. These are his actual words. I told this afterwards, his actual words. He said, there is a vehicle coming, and the only person who would drive here in the rainy season, read crazy enough to drive here in the rainy season, is Dr. Syme.
Right.
And 3 minutes later, we came round the corner.
Wow.
And there was a patient waiting for me. And suddenly, in my mind, God is looming large in this whole story of what has taken place.
Wow.
And so I go in, examine her. She has twins. I deliver one regular way, the other by breech, and 2 twins. The husband wants to kiss my ankles, and I say, no, no. Wakayo has done this from above, not through me. But he came and he said to me, we have 2 gifts from God that has come to us today. God has given us 2 gifts. Every child that is born in Africa, God has given it as a gift. Right. It's very, very strong. Or it was then. I think it's dying these days. But anyway, it was then. And he said, they're a boy and a girl. The boy will be called David, which is Amharic for David. And the girl will be called Elsabet, which is Elizabeth in Amharic. And, we want to thank you for being here. God has brought you here today. So we had to leave. We went back. At the gate, they came and just saluted me, and we went through. And, the more and more I think of it, God was in the whole thing.
Yeah, wow.
Now, like Abraham, I tried to inject something, but I'm not sure that was really what worked. I think God was there all the time and made it possible for us to go. And then why did we get stuck in a river
Mm.
for 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if we had not have passed the gate, or if we had not have got out, been stuck in the river, we would have come and gone before they'd have brought the lady down.
Yeah, wow.
So I have to say,
Yeah.
God is doing his piece so well. Praise his name.
Yes.
What else can we do?
And there he was,
Yeah.
revealing himself.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, well. Thank you, David. Thank you
Okay.
for your stories.
Yeah.
And it's been really good to spend time chatting.
For me too. Yeah, every time I talk, it makes me feel so good about this God we serve and love.
Yeah, amen. Thank you.